Great. So welcome everybody to the annual Sharon Summer Book Signing Reimagined. I'm Gretchen Hochmeister, the Executive Director of the library. We have a great slate of events this summer that we've planned, all on Zoom, to replace our canceled book signing. So if you haven't received information on them, you can call the library or check our website. And just a very quick thank you to all of you who helped us match the book signing challenge grant. We have covered, as of now, our anticipated loss from the cancellation of our biggest fundraiser. So we're so happy that we can offer this event and other events this summer free of charge. So thank you to everyone. We appreciate any and all support. Your mics are muted now. Please feel free to have your camera on or off, however you're comfortable. We love to see your faces. It feels more like we're together at the library. If you have questions after Gerry's presentation, please use the chat box. If you don't know how to find that, you put your cursor down at the bottom of the Zoom box and you'll see the chat box. Click that, open it up, and you can type your questions, and we will read those after after the presentation when we open up discussion. Another option is at that point you can hit the participants button, which is right next to chat, I believe. It opens up a box and you can click raise hand, and then we see that you'd like to ask a question and we will unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question and speak to Gerry directly. So either of those options work. So thank you for following that procedure. We have copies of Gerry Mitchell's book, Race Against Time, available at the library. Gerry will be signing some book plates and returning those to us so you can have a signed copy. So either send us a message in the chat box, call us at the library, or email us, and we will make sure we get a copy set for you. We're very fortunate tonight. We have not just one extremely experienced investigative journalist with us, but we have two. So watch out, they can ask all the questions. Brian Ross, the chief investigative correspondent of the Law and Crime Network, with decades of network television experience, is, fortunately for us, also the treasurer of the Hotchkiss Library Board. So I'm very pleased that he's with us tonight and has agreed to moderate our event. He will introduce Gerry and we will get things rolling. So thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you, Gretchen. Before we begin with Gerry, let me just take a moment to thank you and Holly Nelson and the entire staff of the Hotchkiss Library of Sharon for all that you have done during these trying times to keep the library open and vibrant and available to all of us in our town. We really do appreciate all that you've done. There's a lot more to come, I know. Thank you. It is my great honor, and it's a thrill to be able to introduce Gerry Mitchell to my friends here in Sharon, Connecticut. For more than 3 decades, Gerry has been a lone voice of serious investigative reporting in his adopted state of Mississippi. Most recently, he's founded the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting to keep that kind of work going at all times. He's been awarded a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant, and he is the author of the book about which he's going to speak tonight, Race Against Time, a fascinating book, sort of given the greatest reviews by John Grisham, Eric Larson. All the top authors and writers have seen this book and call it gripping and factual and so important. It's really something you'll want to read. It details how Gerry was involved in essentially bringing justice in 4 cases in which there were civil rights murders in the South. Dozens of Klansmen got away with murder, and thanks to the effort of Gerry and others, finally justice was delivered. So Gerry, thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to talking with you. But before we start talking about the book, let me ask you about what I called you earlier, told you earlier, the miracle in Mississippi. Your state has now banned the Confederate flag. You've retired your old flag. How did that come about in the Deep South?
Well, you had the triumvirate of the churches, or basically the Baptists, the business community, and basically, others who are interested in this. I mean, it was football, basically sports, So when you have kind of that triumvirate of football and these other forces, it's just it's really amazing because it took a 2/3 vote. I mean, this was not just passed by majority. this was passed by 2/3 of the legislature in both houses in order to suspend the rules and adopt this. So, but, football speaks louder than almost anything else other than, in Mississippi, other than that and their churches. So it's fascinating to see. I never expected it. To be honest, Brian, I didn't expect it in my lifetime. So
I wouldn't think so, especially after what you went through in writing this fantastic book, in which you profile four distinct cases that you were deeply involved in. Give us a sense of, start with the assassination of Medgar Evans.
Yeah, I'm going to cover, if that's okay, two of the cases, and I'm not going to cover probably the ones that you might want me to. I know the Mississippi burning case, the killings of the 3 young civil rights workers, 2 of them were from New York City. I can talk about that briefly after, but or a little more after, extensively after. But
sure.
Yeah, this is. Let me go through these, and then I know you'll have questions. Other people have questions.
Take it away, Gerry. Yeah.
Tell these stories. So hang on a second. Let me do the magic thing first, which is share screen. Okay. All right, and now let's see. Let's see. Slideshow. Here you go. All right. There we go. All right. So I don't know if you're like me, but if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse. I don't know if anybody else is that way. I certainly am. Certainly these reporters who are with me tonight are this way, I know. So anyway, there was something in Mississippi called the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was a state segregationist spy agency run by the governor, by the way, of Mississippi. And so it existed from the 1950s into the 1970s. And when it was finally officially done away with in 1977, the Mississippi legislature sealed all those spy records, more than 132,000 pages of spy records for 50 years. So when I found that out, my first thought was, well, there's got to be something in there, or they wouldn't be sealing that, all those records. So I began to develop sources that accessed the files, began deleting the files. And what they showed at the same time, the state of Mississippi was prosecuting a guy named Byron De La Beckwith, the guy on the right, for the murder of Medgar Evers. This other arm of the state, the Sovereignty Commission, was secretly assisting the defense, trying to get Beckwith acquitted, and nobody knew that. I'll tell us very briefly about Medgar Evers. He fought in Normandy in World War II, and fought the Nazis. Came home to fight racism all over again in the form of Jim Crow that barred African Americans from restaurants, restrooms, drinking fountains, and of course, especially voting booths. That was set in law essentially in Mississippi, starting with the 1890 Constitution, which other southern states quickly copied to basically poll taxes and constitutional quizzes or literacy tests or whatever they called them. The idea being that they wouldn't let African Americans vote. In fact, in 1964, as of 1964, only 4% of the entire African American population of Mississippi was allowed to vote, which was 70 years, a little over 70 years later. So Medgar Evers came home from fighting that, got involved in the civil rights movement in the 40s, and then basically tried to enroll at Ole Miss Law School, University of Mississippi Law School, and was turned away from there. He became field secretary for the Mississippi NAACP. And so he kind of became a target of the Klan. And so he was, on the same night that President Kennedy told the nation that the grandsons of slaves were still not free, Medgar Evers was shot in the back in his own driveway in Jackson, Mississippi, June 12th, 1963. And his wife and children ran outside, saw the blood, and screamed. And so anyway, as I mentioned to you about these records, at the time that I wrote this story, which was October 1st of '89, about the Sovereignty Commission, the odds were literally more than 1,000,000 against the case being reopened and reprosecuted. But Myrlie Evers, this is her, the widow of Medgar Evers, believed and prayed, and some amazing things happened. A couple months later, Jackson police were cleaning out a closet and happened to find a box that contained the crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron De La Beckwith lifted from the murder weapon. A few months after that, Myrlie Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she saved in a safety deposit box. And a few months after that, the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet, which sounds like I'm making it up, but it really did happen. So fast forward now to April of 1990, I end up going to interview Byron De La Beckwith, the assassin of Medgar Evers. You can probably guess how I found his house. And so he lived in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, which was a Klan hangout. It's just opposite, this is the reference you probably will get, it's just opposite of Lookout Mountain, which you may remember from Dr. King's speech, I Have a Dream speech, so he made reference to Lookout Mountain, which was a Klan haven as well. So I went and visited Byron De La Beckwith. Spent about 6 hours talking. Absolutely the most racist person I've ever spent time with. Inward this, inward that, and then he started in on other, non-white races. He was a part of we can talk more about this later if you want to know more about it, but he was a part of what's called Christian identity, which is this really horrible racist, set of beliefs, essentially. I believe that Adam and Eve were white people and all the non-white races were created were mud people, and they don't really have souls, and it's just sick anyway, but, and very anti-Semitic as well. So after, like I said, about 6 hours, it was getting dark, so I thought it was a good time to go. And he insisted on walking me out to the car, and I'm like, really? That's okay. I think I can find my way. So he walks me out to the car anyway. He says, if you write positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him. And so his wife had made me a sandwich. I think you can guess what I did with the sandwich. So Byron De La Beckwith was indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers in December of 1990. He fought extradition back from Tennessee, lost that battle. So he's back in Mississippi in the fall of that next year. At the time I went and interviewed him, he didn't realize I was the one that wrote the story that got the case reopened. By now he figured it out. Remember, this is pre-internet. All this is pre-internet we're talking about right now. So anyway, he saw me across the courtroom and he goes, you see that boy over there? When he dies, he's going to Africa. I turned to a friend of mine and went, I've always wanted to go to Africa. So Byron De La Beckwith was convicted of the murder of Medgar Evers on February 5th, 1994. And when the word guilty rang out, you could hear the waves of joy as they cascaded down the hall until it reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And Myrlie Evers and her daughter, Rena, cheered as well. And I just felt chills because the impossible had suddenly become possible. Not too long after Byron De La Beckwith was indicted for the murder of Medgar Evers, I was approached by this family. This is the Vernon Damon family. This is Ellie Dahmer. Her husband, Vernon Damon, died defending the family, essentially. He was a farmer, businessman, entrepreneur, and he believed in voting rights. He believed that this nation would change when voting rights changed, and the Klan didn't like that, so attacked him and his family in the middle of the night, January 10th, 1966, firebombed their house, began then firing of guns into the house, Vernon Damon woke up, grabbed a shotgun, ran to the front of the house, began firing back at the Klansmen so his family could escape safely out a back window. Unfortunately, the flames of the fire seared his lungs, and he died later that day. A few weeks later, in the mail came his voter registration card. He had spent his whole life basically to gain that right for all Americans to be able to vote, right? But never had been able to cast a ballot himself. And then this is what Vernon Damon had. 6 of his 7 sons served a total of 78 years in our armed forces. And this is what 4 of them were in the military at the time. So this is what they came home to when the house was obviously burned to the ground. The guy who ordered this was this man. His name is Sam Bowers, who's the head of the White Knights, the KKK, responsible for at least 10 killings that we know of, probably more. Bowers had ordered his killing, but he'd never been convicted in the case. So anyway, like I mentioned, the Vernon Damon family met with me, and then they met after that with the district attorney's office. He acted interested. He reopened the case, acted like he was going to do something, but pretty quickly got cold feet, wasn't going anywhere. And then he left office, and another DA came in who seemed to care even less. And so it looked like nothing was going to happen. So I'm literally at grad school at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio, when I get a telephone call from this guy who, wouldn't give me his name, but said he had information about the Vernon Damon case. And so he wanted to tell me in person. He wouldn't tell me over the phone. So I flew back to Mississippi, met with him and 2 sons of Vernon Damon, a buddy of his, and some others. And anyway, he basically proceeded to tell me how he'd been a kid at the time and worked for Sam Bowers, and he'd actually overheard Bowers give the orders to kill Vernon Damon. So he came forward. This, now the authorities, this is now spring and summer of 97. And so they reopened the case. Authorities reopened the case. The guy had been the key witness back in the 1960s had been this guy. His name was Billy Roy Pitts. Bill Roy Pitts was involved in the killing of Vernon Damon, dropped his gun, got caught, plead guilty to murder, got a life sentence for that, plead guilty to federal time, got a 5-year sentence for that. So I was like researching these guys that actually there were a handful of them that got convicted in the 60s, and most of them it was a joke. They got their sentences commuted or pardoned by the governor of Mississippi or, things like that. So I was researching him. I got to him and basically went to the feds because of Federal Bureau of Prisons to find out how much time he actually did in federal prison. I knew he had a 5-year sentence. And I'd heard he had something to do with I'd heard that Bill Roy Pitts had gone into the federal witness protection program. And that's why I couldn't find a record of his state time. So I'm talking to this archivist up at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I said, now, how much time did he, she pulled his file, again, pre-internet, pulled his file. And I said, now, how much time did he actually serve on that 5-year sentence? And she said 3.5 years. I said, now, my understanding is he left, federal prison and went into the witness protection program. And the archivist said, that's impossible. So what are you talking about? I said, there was no witness protection program back then. So what it meant was Billy Roy Pitts had never served a single day of his life sentence in Mississippi. Kind of a big oversight, right? So now we finally get to the internet. So I didn't know if this guy was alive or dead or where he was. And, these search engines were relatively, not beginning, but in terms of finding people, they were just kind of cropping up. And there was one I knew that I didn't have to put in a city or a state. Like I could just type in the name and take my chances. And so that's what I did. And up it popped. Billy Roy Pitts had his address, Denham Springs, Louisiana, his telephone number. So I called him. First 20 minutes of the conversation went like this. How'd you find me? How'd you find me? Like, it's on the internet. The internet, like, what's the telephone number? I'm like, well, I guess you take it up with them. So, a result of my story that he had never served a single day of his life sentence in Mississippi, Mississippi authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He didn't like that. In fact, he ran. While he was on the run, he sent me this audio cassette in the mail, and I got it. I played it. This is how it began. Gerry, I just thought I'd let you know you've ruined my life. But I promised I'd talk to anybody I'd talk to you. So here's this tape. On this tape, and proceeds to tell me all about his involvement, killing Vernon Damon, all about his involvement in all this other Klan violence. So shortly after this, he turns himself into authorities. This leads to the arrest of Sam Bowers. This is now May of 1998. And Bowers is arrested along with his right-hand guy. His name is Devers Nix. And when Devers was brought in, it was like the most pitiful sight you've ever seen. They like wheeled him in the wheelchair with the oxygen tank. And they wheel him up, and family wheels him up in front of the judge. And he's like, I can't take more than a couple steps without needing oxygen, Judge. Judge is like, well, I normally don't do this, but I'm going to let you out without bond. A dozen days later, Brian and Rhonda, you guys will get a kick out of this. This is where he found him a dozen days later. Playing golf. That's a gotcha shot, isn't it?
That's a classic. Yeah, that is.
Rhonda, isn't that that's what you like to do as a reporter. It's a gotcha shot, right? So he got arrested. And he loved me. So fast forward now, same guy, Devers Nix, is testifying on Sam Bowers' behalf. This is August of '98, and Sam Bowers is on trial. And Devers Nix is going to testify on his behalf. Of course, this is tricky because he's charged with the same crime, right? And so his lawyer's trying to work out a signaling system with him, because obviously if you're able to claim your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination at any point in time, even if you're on the witness stand. So his lawyer's trying to work out a signaling system with him. And the thing I should think about his lawyer. His lawyer's a really good criminal defense lawyer back in the 1960s. But by now, this guy's in his 80s, which is great. But the other detail you should know is they actually brought him from the nursing home to the courtroom. I don't mean this cruelly. It will explain what the rest of what's getting ready to transpire. And so his lawyer, like I said, worked out this signaling system with him. Says, now, Devers, when you get up there, if you need to take the Fifth, I'm going to raise my hand. I was like, Devers is like, yeah, okay. So Devers gets up. He starts testifying. I looked over his lawyer about 5 minutes later. You can probably guess this part. His lawyer's like, fast asleep. So Devers kept right on testifying. It's like, yeah, I was in the Klan. He was like admitted all this stuff. He tried to put a positive spin on it, like there is one. Well, the Klan was a benevolent organization passing out fruit baskets to the needy at Christmas. So under cross-examination, the prosecutor got and said, Mr. Nix, just how many fruit baskets did you pass out? And Devers says, oh, sad to say, none. I swear it was the funniest trial I ever covered in my life as a reporter. Deadly serious matter, but funny trial. The guy that was the lawyer for Sam Bowers was this guy, Travis Buckley. And Travis Buckley was not just a lawyer for the Klan, he was a leader in the Klan, okay? He was actually indicted for the firebombing at one point. So the prosecution is kind of walking through their case with Billy Roy Pitts, what all happened. And there was this planning meeting that took place prior to the attack on Vernon Damon and his family. So they're asking him about that. The prosecutor is, who all was at this planning meeting? And Pitts is like, I was there, Sam Bowers was there, Devers Nix was there, Travis Buckley was there. And Buckley just doesn't, no reaction. And then the court report, the court reporter is like, what were those names again? And it's like, Billy Roy Pitts, Sam Bowers, Devers Nix, Travis Buckley, and now Buckley shoots up like a rocket. Objection, Your Honor. you know, I've covered a lot of trials in my life. The only trial I ever covered where a witness implicated the defense lawyer himself in the case. So Sam Bowers was convicted and sentenced to life in prison on August 21st, 1998. And like I said, given a life sentence like Byron De La Beckwith. Anyway, the most amazing thing to tell briefly about this, and then I'll get into this. To date now, there have been 24 convictions in these cases. And so it's been an amazing thing to witness. I felt very humbled and honored. I haven't seen all 24, but I'm saying 24 across the entire country. There are actually a number in Pennsylvania, believe it or not, in a York case or cases. And then, but it all started in Mississippi, obviously. But the most amazing thing I've witnessed has actually not been the convictions. It's been some of the racial reconciliation. Not too long after Sam Bowers was convicted, Billy Roy Pitts testified in a hearing. When he got done, he walked to the back of the courtroom and he ran into Ellie Dahmer, Mrs. Dahmer. And he apologized to Mrs. Dahmer and asked her to forgive him for killing her husband. And she forgave him. And she began to cry. He began to cry. And isn't that what redemption's all about? Trying to make things right, trying to make amends of some way for things that have happened in the past. And so thanks for letting me talk to you. I got a few quick commercials at the end of this. One is buy my book or get it from the library. Even better, right? But anyway, it's written like a detective story. And there's a reason I wrote it this way. It was because as a very young reporter, I happened to read the book, All the President's Men, and it inspired me to become an investigative reporter. And so I felt I really wanted to write this book in a similar way, to just tell the story of the reporting and how the cases came to be reopened, and more importantly, the broader story, the courage of these families and what they went through. And I hope that's captured. It's really my character. It's not so much about me and my, what was going on in my life. It's more, I try to keep everything focused on families and what they went through and their incredible courage and perseverance in finding justice. And I got to tell you, I never meant for my book to be quite so current, as it is suddenly right now. And I can't tell you how many different people have reacted to this book in terms of both white and black. I never knew all this happened. I've had people in the civil rights movement tell me, I thought I knew this story. And I realized after I read your book, I really didn't know all of this. And so anyway, I hope you read it. I mean, obviously I'm promoting my own book and I understand that, but it's not really my book. I view it as more their book, the family's book. And then, as was mentioned earlier, Brian did about our nonprofit. Rhonda, who's graciously with us tonight, of course, is on our board as well. And so glad to have her. And, but this is Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. We opened our doors in January of last year. And so we've been operating ever since. We worked with ProPublica for a year and exposed all the abuses in Mississippi prisons, basically warned that these prisons were going to blow up if something didn't happen. And, that Mississippi didn't act on it. And that's what happened. You may have heard the national news on that, where we had 9 inmates killed at all the various prisons within a very short span of time. And now there's litigation, basically the person who's in charge of the prison's thrown out, a new person now brought in. So we'll see what transpires. But we've also done many stories on mental health. We're getting ready to start a series, not this coming week, but the week after, It's called The Poverty and the Pandemic. And if you'll go and look at the New York Times, I may be off my numbers a little bit. I'm just doing by recollection, but I was just looking at them today. I think it's like 7 counties in Mississippi are among the highest or like worst hotspots. And they are in, as we thought might happen, they are indeed the most impoverished places in the state. Not Jackson, which is the most populated, not the Mississippi Gulf Coast, which is the second most populated, but those areas where people have to go an hour or two for ICU care. If you as you all know, with this pandemic, can you imagine that, having to go 2 hours to be able to get an ICU bed? And basically all the major hospitals beds, ICU beds, are now full. And it looks like our cases are still, skyrocketing up. So it's not going to be very pleasant for the near future for Mississippi. And I know New York has been through far worse so far. But anyway, we do a lot of great reporting, and our job is to try to, expose things and get things changed. And that's what we've done historically. And my longtime editor is our managing editor. So she and I are still together, working together. And she's fantastic, Debbie Skipper. And then, and so if you know anybody that is generous and wants to give to great causes, we would love to be on that list. Love to have you, or if you know somebody that you think, hey, they should give, then let me know. And then this is my contact info real quick. I post every day on Facebook and Twitter. Those of you who do follow me know this. But I basically post every day about kind of today in civil rights history, because I love history. You can probably tell that. And anyway, I just kind of post every day what's happening today. Like today was Deacons for Defense, which you may have not heard of, but it was essentially a self-defense organization begun by African Americans in Louisiana. And they were in Mississippi as well, but they basically protected civil rights activists. If the Klan tried to attack, they shot back. And so that was the whole idea behind the Deacons. They were basically formed to say to the Klan, we're not going to take it anymore. And they existed up until latter 60s, in which they just kind of went away. And the need for them, was not what it was. So, but that's Facebook, that's my email, and that's our website, MississippiCR.org. And I think that's it. So anyway.
That was great, Gerry. Let me, I want to throw it open to questions from our Sharon Library supporters, but let me ask you a couple of questions. One, you've stayed in touch, for instance, with Medgar Evers' widow. What was her reaction when the state legislature passed the bill to retire the flag and the governor actually signed the legislation?
I know. I mean, I called her and told her, and she got emotional, like for 5 minutes. Like she was just totally emotional, couldn't believe it. And then she just was overwhelmed. And finally she said, it's gotten requoted a lot of places, Medgar's wings are clapping. And I love that. That's she's a special person to me. We're dear friends, got to be dear friends. And then Rena, her daughter, and I were good friends. And I was just down in Hattiesburg the other day with the Dahmer family, and talked the other day to Rita Schwerner Bender, who's a lawyer in Seattle, and her husband, Bill, who's fantastic. I love them. And anyway, just so many people I've been so fortunate, all these families I've been so fortunate to get to know.
Gerry, are you a marked man in Mississippi, given all that you've done?
Probably some people think so, I guess.
What do you do about your own personal security? And you take it seriously, I hope.
I try to be smart about it. I mean, when Edgar A. Killen, he wanted to, now this is the guy that orchestrated the killings of the three young men. This is James Chaney, who was from Mississippi, and then Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman, who were both from New York. And they're great families too. And the Schwerners are still in New York, and the Steve, his wife Nancy, and then David Goodman, his brother, is in New York as well, or New Jersey is where he lives, but he's in the city a lot. Anyway, but yeah, just try to be smart. But Killen wanted me to go meet him at his house at like 9 or 10 at night. And I'm like, I knew he lived down this remote dirt road. The irony is he has on his front lawn at that point, he had the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. But of course, he had plenty of weapons around. So yeah, I wouldn't do that. So I actually I said, well, how about I treat you? He was working somewhere to the west, which is closer to me, and cutting wood. That's what he did, is he chopped wood basically for a living. And so I offered to buy him and his wife, catfish. So I did. And that was kind of what I met him at a catfish place in Walnut Grove, Mississippi. So anyway.
Do you ever want to get out of that state? Feel like
I find it endlessly fascinating. I mean, this as a reporter. I mean, Mississippi is the state that just keeps on giving, And it's well, here's the way, and it's perfect. The flag's a perfect example of this. I mean, Mississippi, we usually make news. Why? Because we mess up, right? So the rare times we get something right, we make news too. We make news either way. If we do something wrong, and this like there's Mississippi again. If we do something right, then people are going. It makes news both ways. And the other thing I'd have to say, because I think it's important to talk about this. It's easy to read my book and think, oh, that terrible Mississippi. And look, I'm not trying to detract from that one iota, but I think the other thing is, hopefully my book can be more of a mirror of America, because we're the best and worst of America, right? And so, for instance, New York, to my knowledge, doesn't have a historical monument for this, but there were more African Americans. I think the largest number of killings of African Americans after the start of the Civil War was actually in New York City. Which might shock you, but I don't think there's a historical marker there. I have to have somebody go look, but I don't think there is one. It's so you might have heard of the draft riots. It was connected with that, but it's often not talked about. The draft riots are talked about, but what they don't talk about is the other part of that. Those of you who really know that history, I'm sure you know that already, but.
A question for you from Steve Remiel, who is the husband of Rhonda Schwartz, my colleague at Law and Crime, longtime producer, and a professor of law at American University, former Wall Street Journal reporter. So, Steve, take it away.
Somebody unmute Steve. There he goes.
Hi, Gerry. I'm just wondering how many more either unsolved or unprosecuted cases you think there are in Mississippi or across the whole South.
Country. Yeah, well, and never beyond even the South. Like I mentioned, Pennsylvania had some cases. So it's over 120. I don't know what the total is. I mean, part of the problem was, at least locally, it's not like these local officials wanted to prosecute these cases or wanted to do anything about them. And sometimes law enforcement was actually involved in the killings, or either the killings or the cover-up. They certainly were more than happy to nod and wink and let people get away with it. Just like they did with the lynchings that's the other thing we should mention, is how many lynchings there were of African Americans across the country, not just the South, from the 1890s up until the Civil Rights Movement.
Gerry, the language we've heard from the President of the United States is called by many racist. What do you make of what he's been saying?
Well, I hesitate to use that because I and I realize some journalists have used it, but I just hesitate to use the language just from a perspective of it's just gotten so, partisanship has gotten so poisonous now, if that makes any sense. Anyway, but obviously some of the things he said, you know, have not, I think it's at a minimum, you could definitely say the things he has said have not helped our race relations in this country. And, you know, I think the problem is, and this is a problem I see beyond him, I think that's the other part of it is I think sometimes people are so focused on him that they fail to see the broader strokes here and, you know, beyond him. And I think when people, when you start dehumanize, what happens is before people hate, they fear. And when they fear, they dehumanize. And when people dehumanize, they make people less than human, right? I'll give a simple example. Well, this is what they do with our military. I mean, you know this. I mean, there's a great book on this by Sam King called Faces of the Enemy. See, military, before they send them out to kill, right? What do? They use propaganda, obviously. They say, oh, these are terrible people. They're monsters, you know. And so you feel like you're doing a service when you go out and you kill, you know, the enemy. So that's kind of what happens, unfortunately, in language, is when you start calling people murderers and rapists and invaders. In fact, that's what's kind of fascinating, isn't it? That the guy in El Paso who went and killed the 23 people and injured 23 others in El Paso at the Walmart in El Paso, his words in his own little manifesto was that these were invaders, right? The Hispanic people were invaders. And kind of ironic, given that actually we as Europeans were the invaders, actually, you know, given the history. But aside from that, that's the exact same language the Klan used in 1964 when the college students were coming down from New York, and Andy Goodman was one of those, and he came from Queens College. And some of the others who came from across the country, mainly from the north, college students that came down to Mississippi to try to register people to vote and get involved in the civil rights movement. So if they become monsters, if they become invaders, then you're doing society a favor if you destroy them either figuratively or literally.
Gerry, do you enjoy writing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I remember somebody asking me one time, Gerry, what do you do for a hobby? And I almost hated to answer, you know, because most people say, well, I play golf or I, you know, play tennis or whatever it is that they've got. You know, I go climb mountains or something like that. I go, well, I hate to say, so I write. So I do write screenplays too, by the way. That's the other thing I've written. We've written 5 screenplays, my co-writer 9. Sold our first one, which was about Emmett Till, and Taraji P. Henson is supposed to play Emmett Till's mom in that. So anyway.
All right, let me throw it out to anybody else who has a question.
Anna's got one.
Yeah, Gerry, as a young reporter, you weren't born in Mississippi. When you tell us a little bit about your first job and how you got sort of onto this beat. You talk about going to interview, you know, Klansmen in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
How did the first sources get started? How did you get started down this road?
Well, I saw a movie. It's pretty simple. I was sitting in a theater. It was a press premiere of all things of the movie Mississippi Burning, which I don't necessarily even recommend, but it's a fictional movie about the killings of the 3 young men, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, in Mississippi by the Klan. And I was 29 years old. I grew up in Texas, East Texas, which is very much the South. I had no idea about any of this. I mean, I knew in general terms, but I had no idea all this unfolded. And in fact, I sat by an FBI agent who investigated the case. So that, and then there was another agent that was there too, and then a journalist who covered it. So after the movie was over with, for about 45 minutes, I stood there and listened to these three men, tell me about what really happened. This was a fictional film, obviously, and they just kind of went, well, here's what really happened. And I was stunned that there was more than 20 Klansmen involved in those killings and nobody ever been prosecuted for murder. That's the part I just couldn't wrap my head around, Rhonda. And so, it's kind of like, how it is, you and Brian both know, when you're a reporter, a lot of times it's like a shard of glass in your shoe or something, or sand or rock or something, you've got to get it out. You just keep going after it, So that's kind of what led me down the trail of starting to look at these cases, incredibly enough. Yeah.
Holly Nelson, you've got a question.
Yeah, you're not mute. You're muted. You have to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you.
That's so unlike me. No, I had just sent a comment out saying that there was a terrific novel about that included a section about the New York City draft riots.
Who's it by? Who's it by?
Kevin Baker.
Okay.
It's called Strivers Row, and it was very. I mean, it was pretty graphic, but it really looked into that time in which African Americans were coming into the city, and there was some sense of liberty, and then a whole lot of it went up in flames. So it was pretty. It's just really well written. I'll be happy to send you a link to it.
Yeah, send me a link. I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
I'd love to read that.
But my question really is about you as a journalist. I mean, do you find that your success with what you've been able to do? Obviously, you're really good at getting people to talk to you, but the more of that you do, does it make it more challenging because people
Yes.
aren't caught unawares? They know how they know where it might go, and so how do you?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I can't say which case right now, but I'm actually working on another cold case, and I would just put, I'm working on a cold case, and related to that, one of the people that I wouldn't have expected to begin to communicate is now communicating with me. So I'm always fascinated. I think it boils down to people want to be able to tell their stories, even Klansmen. And it sounds incredible.
Even terrible stories, yeah.
They want to tell their stories. And if you're a Klansman, I think especially as people get older, they want to be able to tell their stories before they go. And so I kind of in some ways was tapping into that. The other part of it, obviously, get people to talk, was the fact that at least these Klan guys felt I was one of them. You know what I mean? And in some ways I was. I mean, I'm basically as waspish as you can get, you know what I mean? And I've got all the credentials. I know Beckwith asked me a whole ton of questions, and I could have not answered, but I knew he'd like my answer. So why not answer,
So where are you from? I mean, did you grow up with that accent? I mean,
yeah. I grew up with this accent. I'm sure it sounds like I'm from Mississippi. I've been here a long time, but I grew up in East Texas. We have a drawl too. It's just a little different. It's not quite as thick. At least I don't think I sound as thick, but I've been in Mississippi so long. I probably do to everybody else.
So is part of the goal of your center, of the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, to bring in, to train the next generation of journalists, to teach them sort of, not exactly your tricks, but free them up to be able to develop their own tricks,
Well, I think you do both. I think you certainly share, and that's part of what my book is as well. I'm hoping to share these things with the next generation of investigative reporters and coming up. And we're working with Millsaps College. We have we'll have between 8 and 10 college students we'll be working with. So it's really cool. They did some good work this past semester, and we're hoping to. I'm not sure exactly, given what's going on, what exactly is going to happen with this fall, but we hope to soon have our new set of students who'll be working with us, and some of those are interested in journalism. So they're not all journalism. We call journalism, students who are necessarily interested in, but they're interested in, say, the law. So they're interested in researching these cold cases and things like that. we've got, and in fact, we've got someone from Columbia who's going to be coming down here. Columbia University is going to be a Lipman Fellow who's coming down, and she's going to be investigating domestic violence involving people of color. So we're really excited about that. And Marie Lipinski. So anyway.
That's terrific. And you have a big, so how big a typically how big a staff do you have, or a group do you have working on cases?
Well, we have 3 permanent staff, and then we have a growing stable, I guess you could say, of freelancers, and these are mostly professional journalists who are freelancing, and then some that are, more developing that skill, and they're getting better over time, which is exciting. Well, the one who's Julie, who's covering mental health for us, is doing an excellent job. So we're kind of building up that stable, and then we have 2 interns this summer. So that they're doing a great job, and they're working with me on the project that we've got running a few weeks. It's called Poverty in the Pandemic, which I mentioned earlier. So, that's the problem. Like I was talking to the chief of the Choctaw Nation in Mississippi, and they have twice as many deaths per capita in their tribe than New York City.
Yeah. Wow. New York City.
No.
The New York City.
Yeah.
Okay, another question here. Let's see.
I have a couple of raised hands that have been waiting patiently.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So let's unmute Karen first.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You're unmuted. You are.
I missed the early 60s. I was in college, but I didn't really know what was going on, except that I did protest Governor Wallace when he came to talk. However, I've been watching movies and documentaries all week, including Spies in the Mississippi. I thought you were very sharp in that.
Well, thank you.
But my question is, watching those, there was so much vitriol and hatred between the races. Is that still exist? Is it covered up? Is it just being kept quiet? Or are people really getting along better?
Well, both. If it makes any sense. I do think with each generation, it seems to be shrinking, if that makes any sense. We certainly have our folks that have vitriol. There's no question about that, which is unfortunate. And although I have to tell you this, you know what Myrlie Evers says? It's actually easier to deal with racism in Mississippi. And you say, well, why is that? And she says, well, if somebody's racist, they tell you to your face in Mississippi. Whereas if you're up north, and she, worked all over the country, people might shake your hand and then stab you in the back.
Right.
That's what she said. So I think that's interesting. And I think there's hope. You wouldn't have seen the flag get changed if not for some change of heart. I really do believe that. I think people just realize, if nothing else, that it might mean they wouldn't get an SEC baseball tournament or something like that, if nothing more from that perspective. And people, the problem is, and it's not just for Mississippi, but it's true for the whole country, is we don't know our history. And I think that's what I don't think my book is it's not meant to be a be-all or end-all to that, but I'm hoping it's a launching off point for people to begin to learn that history that we need to know. And that's why libraries are so important. They play that role of helping us learn in ways that, we need to learn, because we need to know this history, because as we're seeing right now, we're condemned to repeat it, right? This year feels so much, and of course it's very different circumstances, but this year to me feels so much, in some ways, like 1968. I don't know, maybe no one else feels that way, but I was pretty young at the time. I was only 9 years old, but I was very much a newspaper reader. I started reading newspapers when I was 7, I think. So I was reading newspapers pretty early.
Good question, Karen. Let's get a couple more in before we have to let Gerry go.
We have a raised hand from Mia.
And am I unmuted?
You are.
Yep.
You're good.
Okay. Gerry, I sit here and I'm so excited about you and everything you are doing. I grew up in Texas, South Texas,
Oh, where is that?
and in McAllen.
Oh, yeah.
And I was at the University of Texas when all of this stuff that you're talking about was happening.
Yep.
Barbara Jordan living down the street from us.
How about that?
And it was a period, and then I went on to live in DC during the riot. So I just feel like when, as you said just a few minutes ago, you feel like this year has been kind of taking us back a little bit. And I remember 2 weeks ago, I went around in my library and just gathered all my 1960s books and took them upstairs. And I thought, I'm just going to go over this again.
Yeah.
But it just excites me what you are doing, because, I know we've been doing, one step forward, two steps back, but I just feel like we are making some progress. And I love what Medgar's wife said. I think that is, it's beautiful. It's going to take some more generations, but I think we've made some progress. And yeah, the other day about the flag, I couldn't believe it. My oldest friend is from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So I feel like I know Mississippi pretty well too. And I love that state for its writers. You've got the best writers in the world.
I know it. Isn't it incredible?
Yeah. They're all crazy, but that's okay.
Yeah. You know what Faulkner said about that, don't you? The people up north, they have the crazy relatives. They put them in the attic, and down in Mississippi, we stick them in the parlor.
Absolutely. No, it's an incredible state in many ways.
Yeah.
It's history, we'll have to deal with. But I just wanted to raise my hand and say thank you. I will definitely be following you. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great. Another question, Gretchen?
Yes, from Philip. He's wondering if you have interns and staff who are African American.
Yes, we do. Shirley Smith is African American. She's actually from the Caribbean American. And so yes, absolutely. And we're trying our best to diversify, and certainly the students are diverse. We have as well. So it's important. I mean, that's what we want to do in raising up the next generation. You don't want to just, and we're looking to expand that program. Kind of want to get our a tiny bit more experience, and especially once we get past this, and once we have a tiny bit more experience, we're going to try and expand out to the historically African American HBCUs that we have 2 in the area. So we want to, enlist them as well.
Well, Gerry, thank you so much. I don't know if there's such a thing as a Zoom clap, but I certainly want to give
Well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Great.
Gretchen, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gerry. And thank you, Brian, for your help.
Thanks,
It's been
Brian.
an incredible experience to hear these stories directly from you, and also to consider them, as people have mentioned, through the lens of all the things going on now in the ongoing fight for social and racial justice. So thank you to everyone in our audience. We so appreciate everybody's support. And don't forget, we have copies of Gerry's book. So you'll be supporting the library and Gerry. So give us a call and join us in 3 weeks for an evening with novelist Amity Gage, who will read from her new novel, Sea Wife. Different experience. Yes, Gerry, do you want to say something?
One last thing, I was to let people know, if you're wanting, I know you got to get book plates, whatever, but if you need, if you're looking for your unsigned copy, you can order from Lemuria Books in Jackson online. They have lots of signed copies, and they will ship them to you no matter where you live. If you're wanting it inscribed in a certain way, and you're willing to maybe make a donation to us at PIR, then you can go on our site. We have, it's a little more money, but the reason is it's meant to be a gift to the nonprofit as well. So anyway.
Great. And Holly just reminded me, we're going to have a great discussion series at the library this fall with Mark Scarborough, English professor, on late 20th century Southern fiction. So,
oh boy, let's see, very good. Fits right in what we're talking about.
He loves to talk about Faulkner and everybody else. So it's going to be great. So if anybody's interested, we need you to pre-register. So let us know at the library. So thank you all so much. Everybody stay safe and well, and read a book.
Y'all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks, Gretchen, Holly.
Thank you so much, Jerry.